Okay, so this class is our last class. Mixed feelings about that. And this one is on products of the hive. And there's a lot, it's some of these products everybody will probably end up doing at some point in time. So we're going to start with honey. And Janice, I'm going to just pull you in when I need you, okay?
Okay.
And feel free to just butt in anytime also.
Okay.
So Janice is co-teaching this with me. Just a little bit of background about her and Larry. They were queen breeders, and they provided they were raised bees in Winston-Salem for a long time. Her queens were some of the best queens around, and they also sell honey, and they still do some pollination. So they're now down in Willow City, and they're doing less bees and more grandchildren. But Janice is also doing some other kinds of products from the hive, because she likes to experiment a lot. So some of the things we're going to be talking about is she's going to have some input. So she's tried lots of different ways of doing things, and she'll talk a little bit about what works better for her. So we're going to start with honey, because that's the big one that people mostly care about. And we'll cover a little bit about getting the frames out of the hive, which is a bigger deal than some people think. Talk about cut comb and chunk honey, creamed honey, extracting honey, and different ways of doing that. Raw versus pasteurized. You get a lot of there's a lot of press these days on you want raw honey. Well, it turns out it's not that big of a deal. And then we're going to talk about labeling and some things about things you need to know before you start selling honey. So removing frames from the hive um, and frames of honey. The first rule is make sure you're leaving honey for the bees, and that was actually one of Meredith's questions, was about how do you know, and are the bees going to make enough honey? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It depends on the kind of year we have. So this year it's looking really good. We'll see how it goes, if we get rained out or not. In North Carolina, and we're in the Piedmont area, and this part of North Carolina, we get two major nectar flows a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. In the spring, it's mostly tree nectar, tulip poplars, black gum, black locust, wild cherry, all kinds of flowering fruit trees. We also get there's blackberry and those kinds of things, strawberries and things like that as well. But most of it is really from the flowering trees. And then in the fall, if we get a nectar flow, it's going to be asters and goldenrod and a few other things. And that honey, is good for overwintering, but not necessarily. We typically, if we're going to take honey, we'll take it in May or June after the spring nectar flow. And how do you know how much honey to leave for your bees? We assume two supers at this point in time. And sometimes they're just not going to make enough. I mean, sometimes they get rained out or whatever, and they don't make enough. And so then we have to feed them. And feeding them is really like anything. It's not the best thing for them, but it keeps them alive. So it's not a long-term strategy, but it is something to keep them alive until there's something better. And we don't buy honey to feed our bees. We might take honey from the bees and freeze some of it and give it back to them, or spread it around in our own bee yards. But we never know what's in somebody else's honey, and especially most of the honey that you buy in the store is from China or something, and it's they don't have the kind of restrictions that we have. So you could be putting something really bad in the hive. So the first rule is try to leave enough honey for your bees. That they're making it for winter, so let's let them keep it. Do people take honey? Yes, they do. And we can sell honey for quite a bit of money, and it's cheaper than sugar. And some people, that's just their thing, is they sell honey. And so they're willing to let their bees die. So if you care about the bees and you want to keep the bees alive, you know, take a frame or something for yourself, but really leave about 2 supers per hive for your bees. They may make more in the winter, they may not, and they'll certainly eat a bunch of it during the summer. So it's not going to, you know, at the end of the nectar flow, that's not all, you know, going to still be there by the time we get to fall. We just don't know what's going to happen. You can also, you know, pull honey off and put it someplace cool. And then if you need it, put it back on your bees. And if you don't need it, then extract it. So you can do that as well. And there are people that do that all the time. So there's a couple of different methods for removing frames from the hive. There's something called a fume board. I mostly use that. There's the shake and sweep method. And it can be called lots of different things. There's a bee escape and a bee blower. And so we're going to start with the fume board. And it kind of looks just like an outer cover, except it's not exactly like that. It's a little smaller. And it's got usually some kind of a top that will absorb the sunshine and basically warm it up a little bit. And then on the underside, it's got some kind of a soft cloth, usually like a felt or something. And we spray something on it that's aromatic. And then you put it back on the hive. And as it warms up, the bees will go down because it's smelly. And that's one of the ways we can get them out of there. And there are different repellents. There's BeeGo, there's BeeQuick, there's other things. One of the things that I find really humorous is we use, most of this stuff has almond oil in it. So, you know, we're sending bees to pollinate the almonds. And, you know, like 1.9 million this year, I think, for 6 weeks. And that's all they get is almonds. But yet the almond oil is one of the things that they don't particularly like. So, you know, that whole thing with the, you know, I think we're going to have to learn more about that. But anyway, so you put the fume board on the super without an inner cover or an outer cover, and the heat from the sun will warm it up and the repellent will become really aromatic. And so the bees will move down because they're moving away from it. This will require more time than, you know, some other methods. Typically, you move it if you've only got one fume board and you've got multiple hives. While someone's pulling off the super, you move it to the next one so that you can get that all going. And each frame is removed one at a time, and the bees are shaken off the frame. Oh wait, this is a different one. Sorry. Let me go back. Okay, so that's basically the fume board. And so, you know, you put it on, it gets real smelly, the bees go down, you take it off, you grab the super, you move it away from the bees, you put it on the next one and you start again. Janice, you got anything else to say about fume board?
No, I think we used an inner cover and we stapled some kind of terry towel underneath it, just wood, put a little handle on the top, and we keep 2 going. So, you know, it'll be working. You know, sometimes it may take 10 minutes or more to get the bees down, and still have bees to shake off, but fume board by far easier than anything else.
Yep. Okay, so then the next one is the shaken, I'm covered up here, so I can't remember what it says. Can you see what it is? Anyway.
Oh. Where are we?
Anyway, it'll require a little bit more time than the other methods because you're pulling out one frame at a time, and you can shake bees, you shake them to get some of them off, and then you use a brush to just sort of sweep them off. It's the shake and sweep method. Yeah. Yep. Unfortunately, I don't see what you guys see. This is too bad. But anyway, so you take them and you sweep all the bees off with a bee brush, or if you don't like a bee brush, you can get a branch that has some nice leaves on it, and you can use that to shake it to scoop them off. And you're being real gentle with them. And then you take the frame and you move it away and put it in an empty super, and then put a lid on it so that the bees don't get back in it. Until you get all the frames. And one of the advantages to doing this is you're looking at each frame anyway, and you can see that it's at least 90% capped, or, you know, maybe the queen snuck up there and you got some brood in there now or something else. So it's a little bit slower, but it's also, even with the fume board, you're going to end up, probably sweeping off a few bees or shaking off a few bees anyway. So Janice, you guys do this a lot, right?
Yes.
And
Even
so,
using the fume board, we have to still brush them off.
okay. And then the next method is using a bee escape. And so the inner cover has that little circular cutout in it. And so you can actually, it's made for a bee escape to fit in it. And so what you do is, and so there's some that are like, you can just buy a whole, it looks like an inner cover with an escape in it. And it's kind of a one-way thing. The bees can go out, but they can't come back in. So you put the board with the bee escape below the supers that you want to pull to harvest the honey. And then the bees up above will move down into the lower part, but they won't be able to get back up. And so that's one way to get them to do it. And it usually takes about 24 hours. And they say you shouldn't really leave it on for more than 24 hours. But that's another way of doing it. And then one of the ways that a lot of beekeepers I know who like to do it is with a bee blower. And they actually even use like a leaf blower, like a backpack leaf blower, and they may change the nozzle to make it a little bit more direct. And you basically, you take the super and you move it away from the hive and you put it on its side. So now you're looking at the underside of the frames, and you just direct the air and blow the bees off of it that way. And that's a little hard on the bees, but it is pretty efficient, and there's a lot of people who do that. So those are different ways of getting the actual bees off of the frame, so that then you can work with it.
Amy, we did try the leaf blower one year, and when we had the honey in the honey house, it smelled like gas to me. And I said, no more.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it was just the smell that got on the wood, but I just felt like I smell gas. So I wasn't crazy about the leaf blower.
Okay. Okay, so once you've got the frames out, then you can decide how you're going to process them. So first thing we're going to talk about is cut comb or chunk honey. And originally, this is kind of what there was, where you would just cut it and you get the honey in the comb, and it's not capped, or it's not uncapped. And some people still prefer to get their honey this way. There are some people who think that if you get a jar of extracted honey and there's not honeycomb in it, it could be fake honey. And so they really like to know that, it's really, it comes from the comb. So cut comb honey is one piece of uncapped honey still in the comb, and it's often sold in those little plastic clamshells. And you can get a cut comb cutter, or you can just use a knife to cut it. And if you're gonna do cut comb honey, you either let them build their own foundation, or you use cut comb foundation that has no wires on it. It's just all wax. And that way you don't have to worry about wires or plastic or any of those other things. And you can use these cutters and you just go through and you can cut. There's also all kinds of fancy things you can get in the hive, where you can get the bees to actually build comb in the round or in jars or there's lots of different things like that is like fancy cut comb. Janice, you haven't had, you've done cut comb, but it's not a big seller, right?
Well, if I don't have it, I have requests. And if I do have it, nobody wants it or nobody asks.
Yeah.
But I also know that, we read where you're supposed to put it in the freezer if you do that cut comb. Put it in a box down in a dark bag and put it in the freezer to preserve it. Maybe to slow down the crystallization, maybe, I don't know. But it has crystallized, and then you're stuck with comb with crystallized honey, which is not good. So we just feed it back to bees.
Yeah. Chunk honey. Now, chunk honey is kind of easy to do and it's kind of fun to do. And you can even do this if you've got wax foundation with the crimped wire in it. And I've done this before, and it's kind of fun for gifts and things like that. And basically what it is it's liquid honey, but it's got a chunk of honeycomb in it. And, you know, you can, like I said, as long as it's not, you know, plastic, and you know, some kind of plastic foundation. There's a couple different foundations that have plastic with wax on them. You can just, you know, take a kitchen knife and cut a chunk out, and put it in the jar. And then as you're doing all that, you're also releasing honey from other places that you're collecting, and then you can use that to fill the jar. Or if you use an extractor, you can add to it. And the comb can be either capped or uncapped. It's just pretty in the jar, so you don't have to do that. And so you're going to you're going to actually cut the comb away. If you have the wires, you're going to cut it away from the wires. And it's easy to fit into jars, because if it's too long, you just whack off the top of it, or, you know, it's just easy to do. And then you just put liquid honey in the rest of it. And I've done this for gifts and stuff, and it's really pretty easy to do. So crystallized honey, all honey will crystallize eventually. Honey made from trees, nectar from trees, will crystallize slower than ground plant nectar, but it'll all crystallize eventually. And you can return it to a liquid state just by warming it up. And there's just different things you can do. If you've only got one jar, I just usually run it under warm. You know, put the lid on the jar and then put it, you know, in warm water and run warm water over it, and that'll do it. Janice, you've had some experience where you've had to put it in the oven, right, to warm it up?
Yes. And that works real well. Because I may have a case jar, you know, that just put it in at the lowest temperature the oven will go, and keep it on for about an hour, cut the heat off, and just let it sit there all day, and it will be back to perfect.
And it once it's reliquefied, it'll stay like that for a while. But
yeah, it'll do
honey is not a bad thing. And in fact, you can even use some of it to make creamed honey. So this is what creamed honey looks like. It's very pretty. And you can spread it on toast and things like that at room temperature. It's also known as whipped honey, spun honey, churned honey, and it's real finely crystallized honey. It's crystallized, but it's much finer crystals than what you typically get if your honey crystallizes. But you can use either existing creamed honey or finely crystallized, or, you know, crystallized honey to help seed it. And one of the things you can do is you need to have some kind of a good mixer to be able to crystallize and whip the honey and to get it to the really fine crystal stage. Anyway, so one of the things, if you're interested in learning how to do creamed honey, just go on the internet and Google creamed honey, and there's all kinds of examples of how to do it. I'm gonna try it this year with some of my crystallized honey. I'm gonna put the crystallized honey in the mix, you know, in a bowl in the mixer, and just run it and see if I can't get something that looks like creamed honey. Have you ever made creamed honey, Janice?
I have not, but I would like to do that. I like to experiment.
One of my friends who died recently, who was down near the Asheville area, she was known for her crystallized honey. And I said, how do you do it? And she said, you buy a jar of crystallized honey, you add it to your honey and you whip it, and it'll, you know, and, you know, over a week, you whip it a little bit, and then you let it sit, and then you whip it and you let it sit, and then you'll get it. So I'm going to try it sometime though, just to see. Okay, so if we're going to extract honey, you only want to extract from capped honey that's about 90% capped. You know, if it's all open, it's going to have too much moisture in it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to last as long as you might like it to last. So we say about 90%. Or Janice, what is your method for making sure that the water content is low enough if it's not totally capped? And this is, incidentally, I'll just point out that this is not uncommon in beekeepers. So.
Right. Well, you know, the comb is slanted. So you turn the frame upside down and just shake it really hard, just a real forceful, just one knock. And if nothing falls out, I extract it. If I see one little drop, I don't do it. I don't take the chance on messing up the whole 5-gallon bucket.
Yep. So capped honey is usually around 18% water content or lower. And so it won't ferment. And Meredith, you were talking about the honey that you've had for a long time. It's fine. As it ages, it gets darker, but it's fine. It's good. What was it? They found a
Yeah, turn my sound on.
Yeah, so there was a baby that was preserved in
Honey,
honey.
Egyptologists just about 15 years ago found an urn in a tomb. And it was in a little side room on the tomb, and they took it out, and when they uncapped it, it was full of honey, except for the fact there was a newborn infant that had been preserved in the honey for 3,000 years, and everything was hunky. Well, not exactly hunky dory for the kid, but nothing had gone bad or anything. So keep your honey as long as you want, Meredith.
Hey, well, I'm on a roll.
Or bring it when you come here. It's Janice. What she has is sourwood honey that's about 30 years old.
Wow.
And you can also, like I said, as the water content goes up, so if your honey's in like a honey pot that's open more, it'll absorb water over time. And so it'll get a little runnier, and it'll crystallize faster then too, once it gets some water in it. And over time, it can also ferment, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just came across recipes that call for fermented honey. And it's not fermented to the point of like mead, but it's what they call fermented honey. It's got a little more bubbly action going in it. And it's also known as baker's honey. And so there's different recipes that you can use that'll call for fermented honey. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to let your honey ferment. But they also have something called a refractometer that you can test the moisture in honey. And people that sell a lot of honey will do that. They'll actually test to see that their honey is the moisture content is low. And also during the North Carolina State Fair, the North Carolina State beekeepers sell a lot of honey there, and all of it's been tested for water content. They won't accept anything that's crystallized or has a higher water content for sale at the state fair. So another way that you can extract honey, and this is the easy one. So if you're only going to pull a couple of frames of honey, or if you've got a top bar hive, or if you're doing like I do, where you do kind of a 3-sided hive and let them build down, or a frame and let them build down, you might want to just do something we call crush and strain. And basically what I do is I cut it out of the frame, I put it in a strainer over something to collect it with, and then I smash it with a spoon or a potato masher, whatever works for smashing. And then the honey runs out, and if it's someplace warm, it'll go faster. And one thing is, we did this for one of our beekeeper meetings, and there were some young people, because we were doing sort of a tandem Bee Buddies little kids thing on the side, and they came up to help, and they got so excited, and they were smashing away, and I ended up with all of this little bitty pieces of wax floating. So I had to let it sit for a while. The wax will float to the top, and then I could just take it off with a spoon. So you wanna crush it, but you don't wanna pulverize it, because you'll get wax in there, and it'll, like I said, you'll wonder what this stuff is floating on the top, but that's kind of what it is. So crush and strain is fairly easy. And this is kind of what crush and strain is. This is kind of a fancy strainer. You can buy different kinds of strainers specifically for straining honey. There's metal, and then there's also plastic. And so she's just basically doing crush and strain into a bucket. And then you kind of beat on it for a while, and then, come back later and, maybe turn it over a little bit and beat on it some more. And eventually most of it comes out. And then what you do with the wax, it has a little bit of the honey on it. And we do this anyway with frames, is we feed it back to the bees. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Uncapping, if you're uncapping honey, if you're going to put it through an extractor, you're going to have to uncap it. You can also, if you're going to just let it drain out, you're going to need to uncap it. So what you do is you basically use a hot knife or a scraper or some kind of other knife, and you cut the very top layer of wax off both sides. And then you save that wax. So you just want to take the very top layer off as thin as you can get it and still have it totally be open. And these are just some different kinds of devices that you can use. So the one in the top left is a hot knife. The one to the right is the one Janice uses. And then the one below is one of the uncapper scrapers. And you've kind of come to really, you do a lot of honey in a year. So you like that knife, right?
Yes. The hot knife did not work well for us because we kept having to unplug it because it was getting too hot. We could smell the honey or wax kind of burning, and kept continuously having to wipe it off. And that knife is super sharp. I mean, it's so sharp, it'll cut the wood frame if you're not careful, but that's the quickest and best right there. And they're, I think, $20.
And it's flexible too, right? It's thin, so it's flexible. Yep. So that works out pretty well. So hot knives are expensive, but you don't have to do that. And there's some new kinds of uncappers coming on. And I've heard mixed reviews about them. I haven't tried it yet, but because I have a knife similar to what Janice has, and that's what I use for uncapping. So here's a picture of what it looks like when you're uncapping. And this person is just using, looks like a butcher knife or something. And so you can see what the honey looks like underneath. And you can see he's doing a pretty good job of keeping it pretty close and just, it's real thin. And so keep the wax from the uncappings because you'll be able to use them later. And there may be a lot of honey in it too. So typically when I uncap, I throw it in a strainer with something under it and a little bit will run off. And that way it doesn't, before I process the wax, I don't have to like wash all that nice honey down the drain. So it's kind of, you get a little bit, you'll be amazed at how much honey you get from the uncappings. It's a good way to fill those jars if you're doing chunk honey. So. You can also uncap and let it drip. And these are just some different things. Some people build things where you can do multiple frames on an angle. And if it's warm, it'll just run out. Some people just kind of throw it in a bucket and let it run out. You're not going to get as much honey out of it as you would if you were using an extractor. But it's still pretty good. And then what we do with the frames when we're done is we put them back in a super, and we take them out to the bee yard and we put them up on their side and we let the bees clean it out. Bees can also, they're also pretty good about cleaning out extractors. So you can also let the bees do that as well. Janice, when you take frames to let the bees clean it out, do you do it like far away from where your hives are, or, is it just close to them? Doesn't matter.
Close. And we just kind of stack them like this so they can get up in there. Now, if sometimes we'll put them right back on the hive and they'll fill it back up.
Yeah,
that's what we prefer doing. But if it's late, in the season, we just let them not far from the hive.
Right. Yep. I've done that where I just put them back on. So you're going to need, if you're using an extractor, you're going to need a bucket for extracting for the honey that you've extracted the flow into. And you may want to add actually a filter between where the honey comes out of the extractor and where it goes into the bucket. And also, if you got a bucket, having a honey gate on it is really helpful. So here's some of on the left side are some of the different filters that are available, and they're fairly inexpensive. And to the right is a bucket, and you see that thing on the handle on it, that's a honey gate. That's what it's called. You can actually buy honey gates and add it to a bucket that you have. You know, if you can drill a hole in the bucket, you can add the honey gate. They're pretty easy to do. And they're really a little bit on the foolproof side, so that's always good. And honey extractors can range anywhere from, you know, $150 for a 2-frame manual honey extractor where you basically crank it, to multiple hundreds of dollars for the versions that, you know, are electrified and do multiple frames. So, you know, depending on how much you're actually extracting and how much you can sell, you know, if you can get something that is automatic and lots of frames, and because you're doing a lot, that'll make it go faster. But the other thing you can do is if you join a bee club, they typically, a lot of them have extractors that the members can use. You can check it out. You just, you know, you have to bring it back, you know, cleaned and in good shape. And sometimes they even have hot knives or, you know, uncapping kinds of things you can borrow too. So it's another reason to be part of a bee club. And when you're putting the frames in the extractor, you got to really make sure it's fairly well balanced. If you've ever put something in the washer and had it be unbalanced and you get that sort of vibration, you can get the same kind of thing going with an extractor. So if you've got a really, you know, if you've got some frames that seem to be really full and, you know, some that are not, you know, balance it with them so that you don't end up out of balance. And you always start slow and then speed up, because you can have wax flying all over inside that extractor and getting into your honey. And then once you get your honey back out of the extractor, we always let it sit for a while so the bubbles will rise and any wax will rise, and then you have really pretty clear honey. Janice, you got anything you want to add to that?
Usually after about a week, a 5-gallon bucket, all that stuff will come up. So I do wait a week before I start jarring.
Okay. So here's a couple of, the one in the top is a 4-frame manual extractor, and then the one below has got multiple frames, and people that do huge amounts will, you know, they do real fancy things. So that's kind of what extractors look like from, you know, looking in once you've loaded the frames in them. And then one of the big questions has to do with raw versus pasteurized honey. You know, we say raw and then unraw, or, you know, whatever. And it's really unfiltered honey. You know, when you extract honey, there can be bee parts in there. There can be big globs of pollen in there. There can be wax in there. And these are the things that we typically will filter out. So usually when I sell honey, I say lightly filtered, because I don't really want to have legs and antenna and whatever in my honey. But we're not filtering, we're not ultra filtering, and we're not heating the honey. So there's still fine particulates in there that we haven't filtered out. And it may be a little bit on the cloudy or opaque side, but not necessarily. I mean, if you look at Janice's honey, it is gorgeous. It is just beautiful. And, you know, some of my honey looks pretty good too. So, and pasteurized honey is heated and ultra filtered. And they do that to improve the clarity and the shelf life. But if one of the ways that we can tell what the floral source is in honey is by the pollen that's in it. And if it's pasteurized, there's no more pollen in it. That's all been filtered out. And pollen's one of the things that's actually good for you at some level. So, you know, that's something that we really just don't, we just really don't do. I don't know anybody around who ultra filters. They usually just do a light filter, or, you know, when you buy the filters, you get 3 different levels, you know. I don't even remember exactly which ones they are, but you know, you can, if you do that, you haven't ultra filtered. So Janice, anything?
Where do you buy the nut?
I use the metal filter that's got kind of big holes in it, and then I'll put filter it again with bridal veil. You can buy at Walmart, just big sheets. I bungee it around the bucket, and it actually goes through that. I do use the plastic one too, filtering the cappings.
Yeah.
Seems like the filter is this deep, so I don't get a whole 5-gallon bucket, you know. So that's why I use the bridal veil, just to be able to fill up my bucket a little bit.
Right. There was a question, Janice, about where did you buy your knife?
Any of the bee places have them. Kelly Beekeeping, Miller's, yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll find it and we'll put it on the website or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So labeling honey is really important because there are federal and North Carolina state requirements for labeling honey. And the name honey actually has to be on the label. And you can include the flower source like sourwood or clover as long as a certain percentage of the nectar actually is. And it used to be that we could send our honey to Texas A&M and have them, there was a guy there, Dr. Bryant, he actually could tell you exactly what the pollen source was and what percentage of the different pollens, so that you really could say it's sourwood or it's clover or it's, you know, myrtle, as it turns out. But he died recently. He died in January. So I don't know if anybody's taken that over, and I don't know how they're determining. A lot of times we just call it wildflower honey because we don't really know what it is. So, and you also have to have your name, address, and zip code. Or if there's a way to easily look it up on the web, so like a website address, you might be able to not have that. And you have to be, we sell honey by weight. We don't sell honey by the bottle. So when you're looking at buying jars of honey, like one of the things Janice pointed out to me is, you know, 1 pound of honey is a 12-ounce jar. So you actually, and a quart is 3 pounds, I think, that's right. So we're selling it by weight, and we have to do net weight, and that's what we're putting on. We actually have to say net weight, whatever. And it's got to be in the lower 30% of the label in pounds and ounces or grams. So this is kind of what a honey label would look like. So it needs to say honey, or it can say wildflower honey, weight in ounces and grams, or, you know, I typically just do ounces. The name of the producer, the address of the producer, and that's all that's legally required. But if you really want to know more about it, if you go to the ncbeekeepers.org, and then under resources, they have labeling, and there's a lot of information about labeling. And then the other thing you can do is you can also, you can actually buy pretty labels for your honey. And through most of the bee supply places will have label contacts. So, and if you just Google, you know, honey labels, you can find all kinds of places that do that. So products, some of the products with honey. So these are some of the things. So to the right there, you can see this is what a honey label looks like. Janice's honey label looks like.
I did cut off the bottom of it so it would fit in that little jar, but on the full label, it's got Willow Spring, it's got my phone number, it's got a website, and it's got net weight. So I stuck it on the back of the jar, that part.
That's right. In fact, I have some here. And so all the information is there. It's just in 2 parts. So she uses honey when she's making eczema cream, and she also has been making infused honey. And this one is cinnamon, but she's got a whole bunch of different ones. So if you want to know about how to make infused honey, and oh my goodness, is it good? And
it is so easy to do. I thought it would be hard, but it's not. Just make sure whatever you're infusing is dried. Of course, that cinnamon, just use the cinnamon stick. And I just put a handful, maybe 7 or 8 in a quart jar, filled it with honey, and every day I would flip it upside down, back and forth until it tasted good. It may take 3 weeks. I did blackberries, but I dehydrated the blackberries. So don't try any kind of fruit that's not dried, or it will probably ferment.
Right.
But it's so easy.
Yep.
And lavender, I grow lavender. It infuses just in a couple of days. Yep. But you just kind of invert the jar, every day till you get it. And some people will heat their honey, but I don't do that. It may work quicker if you heat it, but I'd rather do it this way.
Wax processing, and Janice, we need to pick up the pace here, so because we're starting to run out of time. So wax processing, save your wax cappings, and also the wax from old brood frames. You can process those, and some things you can do with the wax. You can use it for frames, either like coating plastic frames, or I use it for putting cut comb helping to hold the cut comb foundation in. You can make candles or other molded wax with it. You can use it in beauty products. You can use it, those bee wraps that you use to cover bowls and stuff. You can actually make your own with that. And then seamstresses use it for like, waxing threads to make it easier to thread a needle. You can use them for fire starters. You can use them for furniture wax, different things like that. And a couple warnings, remember that wax is flammable. So be careful when you're heating wax and where you're using wax. Another thing is when you're working with wax, you want to use whatever tools you're using. You want it to be for that wax processing specifically. Don't use any of your good cooking equipment because you'll ruin it. So just don't. You can go to Goodwill or something and buy cheapo stuff. And never put anything that's had wax on it in the dishwasher. You will break your dishwasher. It's just don't do it. So some methods of cleaning wax, you can, this is one method. This is what I do because I'm not doing a lot of wax. I'm just doing a little bit of wax. So what I do is, that's an old pot that I bought at Goodwill, and in it is, and it's got water in it. So I've kind of made a double boiler kind of thing. And in it is a can, that was crushed tomatoes were originally in that. So one of the bigger cans. And I throw the wax in there, and then I heat it at a sort of a low, almost not a real boil, but close to a boil, and it'll melt. And then what I've done is I put wax paper down on my counter, and then that was a plastic bottle. I think it was like Smart Water or something like that. So you can use any kind of plastic bottle like that. And then I use, when my mom died and we were going through her things, she had 1 million of these knee-high pantyhose. And so I washed them all, and those are what I use. So, I put it in and stretch it over and put a rubber band around it. And then I pour the wax through that as a way of straining it. And then you'll see to the right, that's the debris is left in there. And then what's in the bottle is the stuff that's clean. And then I can just use that to pour. So if you're just doing a little bit of wax processing, or when you're just getting started, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is a solar melting box. So you can actually create these things. There's plans all over the internet for them. You put your wax in there and it'll melt it. And then, it separates the debris and all that stuff. So you can do that too. And you can buy them or make them, but look for plans on the internet. And then the other method for doing it is you actually putting it in boiling water. And this is what Janice does. And so these are pictures of, those are Janice's hands holding the pantyhose legging thing open. And you just, you put the wax in there, and then you tie it, and then you put the whole thing in boiling water. Do you put a gator clip or something to keep it from going into the water?
Yeah.
So it's hanging off the side of the
I
pot.
knot it and then hang it on to that little something on the jar. I mean, on my bucket.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
and again, this is a pot that is specifically for processing wax. It's not used for any cooking thing. So it's specifically for that. And then as the water is getting hotter, the wax will melt, but all the debris stays in the hose. And so you can see to the right, that's just all, bee parts and propolis and pollen and who knows, tree parts, even whatever is left below. And then when the water cools, the wax will float to the top and you'll get this nice ring of wax that looks like that. And it has clean wax has a really nice aroma to it. It smells good and it's a pretty color, and you can sell it for $10 a pound. And one of the things that that Janice recommended was, don't do too much, because you don't want, really thick discs of wax. It's hard to get it out of the pot, but it's also hard to work with it, because depending on how you're going to use it, you might need to break it up or do something like that. Janice, you got anything else for that?
No.
Okay. And so some of the things you can use clean wax for, you can make candles, you can make Christmas ornaments. Those are Christmas ornaments that Janice has made on the far right. And they smell really good. And when the Christmas tree lights are behind them and they warm up a little bit, you get that really nice honey smell to them. Some other uses of clean wax, you can use it for like body butter. So here we were first grating the wax so that it was in small bits, and then you weigh it. And then you add other like essential oils and whatever, and kind of a double boiler kind of thing. So you can see to the right that, she's added the wax and some other things in there. And then she pours them into the molds. And then when they're cool, you get this really pretty, and the body butter is really nice. So it's, you can rub it on your feet or your hands or whatever. It looks really nice and it's really pretty. So that's one thing you can do with it. Some other things, you can make lip balm out of it, or nail and cuticle. So there's all kinds of things that you can use wax for, with some essential oils and some other things. So it's really pretty nice. You can also use it to help you can either paint it on, paint the wax on, the liquid wax onto plastic frames. The bees will be more likely to draw it out. Or I use it if I'm like, a lot of times I'll just do a strip of cut comb, or if I do the whole cut comb, I use some wax to help keep it in the frames better. It helps adhere it. So to the right, you can see there I have the liquid wax in the, that I've already strained, and I'm holding the one side up and I pour it on the one end and then let it run down. Now, one thing I will caution you about is if you pour too high on cut comb wax, it melts and then you've got a mess. So that's one thing. So you have to be a little bit careful with that and kind of get a feel for it. And then here's on the right is somebody just painting, wax over. And in fact, they had already cleaned off all the wax that was already on that plastic frame. And now they're just adding new fresh wax on it, and then the bees will build on it. And those are just those little sponge paintbrushes. And so you can do that. Do you do this with your plastic frames, Janice?
Yes.
And do you do a brush like those little spongy brushes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It gets gunked up pretty quick, but you just work fast.
That's right. You can also, propolis is another one of the products from the Hive, and it's got some healing properties for both humans and bees. They're really just learning a lot about it right now. And in fact, there's been a research project going on out of NC State, and I think with a couple other places, where they found out that bees actually use propolis to self-medicate, that there really is properties in propolis, antiviral, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial. And so we're learning more and more about propolis as time goes on. You can use it to treat cold sores. You can use it for a sore throat. You can use it for skin problems and wounds and stuff like that. So it's one of those things. The problem with propolis is being able to get it. So there's a couple ways you can collect it. One of the ways is to just scrape it out of the hive and then clean it. So you'll notice that there'll be globs of propolis. The bees propolis all kinds of things. If a mouse gets in there and they kill it, they'll propolis it over so that it's just not rotting in there. But they also will put propolis around anywhere there's a crack, anywhere like between the frames. They can do that if you don't have the frames pushed real close together. And anyway, you can chisel all that. You can use your hive tool and take it out. But when you do that, there's going to be bee parts and wood parts and who knows what in there. So it's got to be cleaned, and cleaning is not easy. So Janice, what she's done with her propolis, because she uses propolis a lot in her products, is originally she was putting it in a pot, lowest temperature on the oven, in water for 3 to 4 hours, stir it periodically. And then the debris will float to the top, but the propolis settles to the bottom. And now you've got a big chunk of propolis you've got to now chisel out of the bottom of the pot. So, it's not easy to do. She started using propolis traps, and you can buy propolis traps. And then what you do with that is you just put the whole thing in a plastic bag and freeze the whole thing. And then you can just, by smooshing it, you can break it and get the propolis to pop out of it. So this is what
that's the way to go.
What? Way easier?
That's the way to go.
Yep.
Propolis trap.
This is what a propolis trap looks like. It looks a lot like a queen excluder, except that but they're a little closer together, and it's a flexible plastic so that you can twist it and pop it like you would an ice cube tray kind of thing. You put it on top of the frames, no inner cover, and you want to prop up the outer cover because you want light to be coming in, because they'll propolis it over because they want it to be dark in the hive. And so they'll start filling it up with propolis to keep the light out, and also to keep other critters from coming in. So that's easy to do. So to the left is propolis that she cleaned in a pot in the oven and then chiseled out. The one in the middle is brown propolis, and the one on the right is just popping out of that thing. So it's finer, it's easier to work with, it's cleaner. It's just propolis. It doesn't have a lot of other debris in it. And then we were going to talk quickly about how do you grind propolis. Well, you can use a pestle, mortar and pestle. That's kind of a slow way to do it, but you could also use a coffee grinder. But if you're going to use a coffee grinder, freeze it and work fast in small batches, because the coffee grinder will warm it up. And then, propolis is that resiny stuff that the bees bring in, and it's tacky and sticky, and you can make a mess really fast. And then what do you do with it? Well, if you have a chunk, like one of these big chunks, you can just suck on it if you've got a sore throat or something, or chew it. Or you can make a tincture with it that you can spray in your mouth, or use an eyedropper for sore throats or other kinds of things. And if you're going to do a tincture, you're going to need some good liquor. So Everclear is really good. Anybody who's doing medicinal tinctures is using Everclear or moonshine. So on the left is how much propolis it took to make that much of a tincture of propolis. And then you filter it. Once it sits for a long time, you're going to filter it back through like a coffee filter or something to get the chunks out of it. And then you can put it in either an eyedropper and then just put it, drop in the back of your throat, or you could put it in a spray bottle and, spritz it in, that sort of thing. You can also use it to make soap. So one of Janice's premier soaps is a propolis soap, and she also puts it in some of her lip balm. So if you get cold sores or something, having a lip balm with propolis is great. It just takes care of it. So it's really good. Or any kind of I think even with like chapped lips and stuff, the propolis really speeds healing really, really fast. So those are just some of the things you can do with propolis. Pollen, you can collect pollen when it's plentiful. it's a little hard on the bees if you're collecting it too early or too late in the year, because they really need to have the pollen for the baby bees. And pollen has lots of minerals, vitamins, and amino acids. And in fact, we talked earlier about there's just a couple of plants that have almost perfect amino acids. Otherwise, the bees have to collect pollen from a lot of different things to get all the nutrients they need. The thing about pollen is it's pretty moist when the bees bring it in. So if you're going to collect pollen, you really need to kind of collect it on a daily basis and freeze it. Otherwise, it'll start to grow molds and other things, and then you'll have other kinds of problems with it. And you can use, there's all kinds of different pollen traps, but basically, as the bees are coming back with their pollen bags, baskets full, and as they crawl through to get back in the hive, it dislodges it and it falls into a tray, and then you can collect it from there. So what do you do? Whoops, did I do? One of the things you can do with it, I don't know where I did this. I guess I got rid of that one, but one of the things you can do with it is you can feed it back to your bees. So in addition to using pollen for food, you can actually feed it back to your bees in the spring rather than using, pollen substitute or something like that. And I think I lost one of my slides, or it may show up still later, but anyway. So that's kind of pollen. A lot of the bee pollen that they sell in the stores probably has other stuff added to it. It's probably not just pollen. It probably has some honey or other things. The bee bread that the bees make with the pollen, it's got other kinds of nutrients in it, and bee bread may be better health-wise than just straight pollen. Our bodies don't process pollen real well. So if you're getting a little bit of pollen in your honey, it's probably enough to sort of create some antibodies related to whatever the plants of the pollen have to do with it. But in terms of nutritional, we're still trying to figure all that out. So there's another thing you can do is you can collect royal jelly. It contains a lot of nutrients, and it may or may not be helpful for humans. Antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. It's good for wound healing and skin repair, anti-aging effects. So you'll find it in cosmetics a lot. And some queen breeders actually also save it, and they use it for priming their cells when they're doing grafting. So this is what a queen cell looks like. It's got a lot of royal jelly in it. So basically what they would, somebody who's collecting a lot of royal jelly for sale would get a whole lot of these queen cells going. And then when the larvae are about that big, they take it out and they just take and extract all the little larvae, and then they just scoop out the royal jelly, and then they strain it, and then they sell it. And so you can do all that. Janice, when you were grafting queens, did you save royal jelly for priming, or did you just use water?
No, usually there's just a little bit of royal jelly down in there that I was able to use. So I didn't prime any of my cups or anything.
Yeah, so just whatever.
I may have tried it, but I was not sure where the royal jelly was coming from, and I heard that you might not want to buy it.
Another thing that I've heard from other bee breeders is if you use royal jelly that isn't from, doesn't go with that larva kind of thing, the bees will actually get it out of there and put their own back in. So it's kind of a waste of money. But I understand, because when you're scooping out the larva, you're getting some of the royal jelly that's right. With it. And they actually feed the larva royal jelly for the first 2 or 2.5 days. So you're not getting anything that's gonna affect the quality of the queens if you're doing it. If you're starting to get bigger larvae, you got a problem. So don't be using anything older than 2 or 3 days for grafting. And then apitherapy is another thing. It's bee venom, and it's no longer used just in alternative medicine. Right now, beekeepers can actually collect bee venom with a device. It's an electrical device that gets the bees to actually sting the device, and it collects the venom. And they use it in, you know, hospitals and doctors' offices and things like that. So it's administered through, you know, regular doctors. It's used to treat things like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, which is what I don't have rheumatoid, I have osteoarthritis, and so it works for my hands. Different kind of nerve pains, tendonitis, reducing the reaction of bee stings, so you can actually have you know, go to a doctor or somebody who is qualified to do apitherapy, and they'll just slowly build you up to where you can deal with the bee venom. And so this is Larry. This is Janice's husband, Larry, and he's our best apitherapy story. So Janice, go ahead and tell us the Larry story.
Well, he had tendonitis in his elbow and had gone to the doctor twice to get a cortisone shot. The first shot worked, second shot did not work. And I ran into a fella, Clinton Parker, in Kernersville. He is deceased now, but he religiously would take his jars of bees to different people that had MS, just a number of things, and he did it religiously. And so I told Larry about it, and so Larry started collecting honeybees out of soda cans at work. And so we had a fella pick up the bee and sting his elbow, and he's maybe for a couple weeks he stung it, not every day, but it went away. And so we started keeping bees. That's where it all began. But you got to be really careful when you sting yourself. Don't sting your bone. Find a joint, you know, a soft, cushiony, like right there. If you have arthritis or something, just a real soft place in between a joint, and sting yourself there.
Yep. And there's different ways of doing apitherapy. There's, you know, it's a whole, I mean, there's training and stuff now. One of the conferences, we had somebody that does apitherapy. And there's even things where, you know, you basically can hold the bee with the tweezers, and you can do what's called micro stings, where it doesn't actually get the stinger all the way down. And so you can just sting around something, and it'll, you know, it's a little bit milder, and it doesn't kill the bee, and then you can let the bee go. So those are all, you know, things that are kind of being done these days. So that's pretty cool. So that's all that I have. This is our last class, so thank you all very much. It's been really great, and please stay in touch. I'm really enjoying getting to meet new beekeepers and the new excitement and see what's happening. And hopefully, you know, this is the last class, but we can get back together on Zoom sometime. We can get together in our bee yard sometimes. I'm happy to come and see what your bees are doing. One of the things that's easier for me to help is if I can see what your setup is like, because it can be so incredibly different. So